The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Douglas Morris. I'm the Strategy Director at Ratio. We are a digital agency based in London, helping dozens of customers using the Sitecore content management system to make use of the marketing features in order to deliver better business outcomes for their organization. Today's presentation is quite a popular topic for our clients. We're going to be talking about how to leverage both Sitecore and Google Analytics. Most of our clients are using Google Analytics as the source of truth for their marketing activities. However, Sitecore itself has an analytics feature, as most of you probably know. It has many great parts to it that can really also drive value. So we're going to look today basically at how we can combine Sitecore and Google Analytics to have a single customer view and to really deliver some great business value. So here's, in a nutshell, what we're going to be talking about. Firstly, we'll look at what the relative strengths of each of those platforms are. Second, we'll look at, if we are to integrate, what data points should we consider integrating between the two platforms. Thirdly, we'll look at how to actually go about creating an integration between Sitecore and GA. Fourthly, which kind of gives the game away in terms of what type of integration we suggest, we'll be talking about how once Sitecore data is in Google Analytics, it can be accessed. And finally, we'll look at what some of the analysis and insights you can get once you've got such an integration in place. So firstly, let's talk about Sitecore. Sitecore has a bunch of strengths relative to Google Analytics. The first is that the tracking is server-side. As you might be aware, there's a lot of changes to modern web browsers, making them more privacy-focused. We're seeing that across Mozilla, Firefox, Safari, and Chrome. And there's a move towards blocking by default the sort of tracking scripts that some analytics platforms rely upon. And given that Sitecore is server-side and it only relies upon one persistent cookie for the analytics to work accurately, it means that the tracking is more accurate. It captures a larger percentage of your website visitors. You're less susceptible to ad blockers and things of that nature. Within Sitecore, you can allocate users into personas. So this is a very sophisticated feature that is hard to impossible to replicate within Google Analytics. The best that you'd be able to do in Google Analytics would be to specify that if someone saw a certain page, then maybe they fit within a persona. Within Sitecore, it's way more dynamic. You can, it reallocates people into new personas over time as their content engagement patterns change. So basically, it's a much better place, Sitecore, to try and determine which persona your website visitors fit into. Of course, Sitecore is your content management system, and that means that it's got a bunch of metadata about each piece of content on your website. What you'll find in Google Analytics is that the data it can collect with an out-of-the-box implementation is restricted to what's actually just available on the page. So things like the page title, the URL, whereas Sitecore has other information, like when the content was published, who the author was, perhaps what the length of the content is, what the type of content is, whether it's an article or rich media or something of that nature. And that's a lot of rich information when it comes to performing analysis about how content's working. Sitecore is focused on individuals as opposed to groups. So it's probably the case that in your Sitecore solution, you've got identified contacts who have submitted forms and things of that nature. Maybe you're even bringing in information from CRM or some other marketing system once you have identified someone. And Google Analytics, as well as being focused on groups of people as opposed to individuals, is also completely anonymized. So that's something as well that is a strength of Sitecore. Sitecore is or should be your testing tool. So from a personalization or A/B testing point of view, it's the one that knows for sure who saw which version of a component or which version of a page. And Sitecore has also engagement value, which many of you are probably familiar with, which is a very nuanced way to understand the engagement levels of all of your visitors who don't convert. So all of this is to say that there is a lot of very helpful, informative, insightful information held within Sitecore. And next we'll look at what the strengths of Google Analytics are compared to that. The first one, and it's non-trivial, is that it's probably already your marketing source of truth, and it's best where possible that your numbers should match up. And so most of our customers, even though they're using Sitecore as a content management system, are still defaulting to Google Analytics as the source of truth, as that's what they've been using already. You probably have organizational competencies around Google Analytics. You're going to find it easier to find people who already have those skills. There's more literature available from a training and development point of view. And again, that's a non-trivial benefit. The key benefit, though, from a GA point of view, in my mind, is the ability to apply segmentation to the reports that you're looking at. So the fact that you can slice and dice the data in Google Analytics in different ways means you can get way more insights. You're not just restricted to looking at a report as it was created and envisaged by someone else. You don't need any development or customization to add new segmentation or filter options to that report. When you're looking at a report in Google Analytics, you can pretty well slice and dice it by any other bit of information that you have. And we'll go into some of the ways to do that soon. And finally, there are a bunch of ad integrations with the rest of the Google marketing ecosystem that are kind of native to Google Analytics. So if you find something interesting in Google Analytics or an interesting segment of users that you'd like to target with an ad somewhere on the display network, you can push that segment of users out to the display network, and you don't need to. And I mean, that's something that's enabled out of the box. So particularly because Google Analytics has this amazing segmentation abilities, what we normally suggest from an integration point of view is that we get all of that fantastic information that Sitecore is capturing about each visitor, or will be once you implement the necessary features in the from a marketing point of view. So once you're creating and profiling, once you're profiling content, once you're allocating engagement value, personas, running experiments, that you get all that information and that you push it to Google Analytics, linked to the relevant visitors. And now within Google Analytics, not only are you able to use that amazing slice and dice feature on your on the GA data that's collected out of the box, you can also use that slicing and dicing features or the segmentation features on the data you push from Sitecore. And you can also use some of the Sitecore metrics within Google Analytics to measure the performance of your campaigns, if it is your marketing source of truth.
Hello, Doug. Just to let you know, your sound seems to have just dropped off for a moment. If you could just probably just reconnect your headphones, please. Sorry, everyone on the presentation. We're just going to give Doug just 1 second, and it looks like he's got a technical hiccup. So we just let him just reconnect his headphones, and I'm sure he'll be back online and get the screen represented and the sound back up in a second.
Are you able to hear this now, Mario?
Perfect. Thanks, Doug.
No problems. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about that. I'll just recommence the screen sharing. Okay, so yes, we have context about the content that's held within Sitecore, can't be found in Google Analytics. We have context about your users that's held within Sitecore, can't be found in Google Analytics by default. And we have context about the experiences that people are seeing from a testing or personalization point of view. And this is all very, very helpful information to push across to Google Analytics from Sitecore. So what we'll look at next is how to go about actually pushing it across. And then after that, we'll look at some of the sort of reports and insights that enables once you've got that integration in place. So this is going to be a little bit technical, so bear with me. But we have 2 methods to get the data from Google Analytics to Sitecore. The first method, which is the best practice and requires the least configuration, is to use something called a data layer. So a data layer, when a visitor loads a page, a data layer is an invisible container of information sitting in the HTML of that page. The user can't see that that information kind of within the visual layout of the page, but it's there nonetheless. And Google Tag Manager can examine that data layer, listen for changes to that data layer, things that are being added or removed, so new information or information that's being taken out of the data layer. And when it sees there's a new bit of information, it can pick it up and it can send it off to Google Analytics. So what in this best practice you'd be doing is getting your front end and back end developers for your solution to work together. The back end developers would be exposing some information held about the content or against the user's visitor profile to the front end of the website. And your front end developers would be taking that information and adding it to the data layer, so that Google Tag Manager can read it and send it off to Google Analytics. So in this example, it's a very simple one. We have what a little JavaScript snippet would look like to add something to the data layer, where we're telling Google Tag Manager what type of event has just occurred. In this instance, we're telling Google Tag Manager what the engagement value of the visitor is and what their persona type is. And so this will take a little bit of work, customization of your solution to get in place, but it is best practice. It means there's not going to be any, because your developers are controlling what information is sent and you're not having to do too much configuration as a marketer to pick up on that information and actually push it on its way. It means that it reduces the risk of things changing that you're not aware of and that sort of thing. But the other method that we have used with some clients for different reasons is to, within the HTML of the page, to expose some information about the component, again in a hidden way, but just within literally within the HTML rather than in this this data layer object I'm referring to. So in this case, we might have an element here or a component that's image link widget small. That might be the name of the component. And here we are in the HTML recording the fact that the data source name for that component is manifesto. And then within Google Tag Manager, we can do some configuration to read a data source name where it appears and record that in Google Analytics. So suffice it to say, they both require some development and customization, but the data layer, which should not be a complex topic for most developers to understand and execute upon, is the best practice. So now we have got information pushed from Sitecore to the HTML, whether it's within the data layer or literally within the HTML of the elements that are sitting on the page. Google Tag Manager has picked that information up and it's sending it off to Google Analytics. And then we have some choices about where we actually store that information in Google Analytics. Probably don't have time obviously on this webinar to go through exactly what sorts of information you would store in which place in Google Analytics, but suffice it to say there are a few options that you have. And I can talk to them briefly, and this might start to get your brain working as far as the sorts of things that you might want to track. So where you store it within the various options you have in Google Analytics is almost entirely dependent on what type of content it is and what sort of analysis you want to do with it after. Firstly, we have custom dimensions and metrics. Custom dimensions are data points. So custom dimensions and metric. A dimension is something like what sort of browser someone's using, or what persona they fit into, or what day of the week they come into the website. So it's kind of a piece of text, if you will, whereas a custom metric is actually recording some sort of number. So a metric could be engagement value, for example. We have event tracking that we can also store information in. Event tracking is typically used in Google Analytics to record interactions that someone is making with the page. So you could tell your developers that every time someone clicks on this specific banner, you want to tell Google Analytics that that specific banner was clicked. And because that is an interaction within the page, like a click, rather than just telling Google Analytics some sort of generic information attached to the visitor profile, that's a scenario where you use event tracking. Google Analytics has something called enhanced e-commerce, which isn't always just for e-commerce companies. It has some things in there that can be quite helpful for other sorts of organizations as well. So one of the features of enhanced e-commerce is that there's this concept called internal promotion tracking. And what you're trying to track with internal promotions are the types of offers or promotions someone seen, how many people saw them, and how many people responded to the promotion by clicking on it or interacting in some other way. So that can be helpful to use that feature, for example, if you had a hero carousel on your homepage, for argument's sake, and you wanted to track the performance of the various different slides within it to work out which ones people are engaging with a lot and which not so much. That's a scenario where the promotion would be the type of slide the person saw, and the interaction or like success event associated with that banner would be someone clicking on the call to action, which you'd also record, and then you'd know how many impressions or how many visits saw each banner, and you also know how many clicks, and as I said, you work out the performance. And finally, we have a feature called content grouping, and I'll touch on this in a little bit, so I won't go into too much detail about it now. So we've got all this fantastic information in Google Analytics, either in a custom dimension or metric or event tracking or internal promotion tracking. And the question is, how do we actually start tapping into it? And we tap into it using one of two methods typically. And these are what I was talking about as the strength of Google Analytics, which is the ability to use segmentation. And I'll show you two methods to use segmentation, which both have relevant use cases, which I can touch on a little bit. So the first is literally when you're looking at a report in Google Analytics, you probably notice or have noticed that there's this bar up the top, or this banner up the top, which has all users highlighted, 100% of users, and then it's got another grayed out box next to it saying add segment. And this is where you can specify that, hey, Google Analytics, don't just show me this overview report, like the generic number of users, new users, page views, etc. I only want to see that data. I want to filter that entire report and only show me the data that's relevant to a specific subset of your users or a specific segment. So, for example, out of the box, when you have this overview report, you could create a segment and say, hey, only show me this data where the user's device was mobile. And then you would have an idea of what the mobile engagement statistics look like on your website, as opposed to just the overall statistics. Obviously, when we're talking about Sitecore and Google Analytics integration, mobile isn't the most relevant example because that's something Google Analytics is already knows out of the box. So another example could be that you might want to see a subset of this report associated with a specific persona, or you might want to show how many visitors saw a specific promotion, or how many were attached to a specific company if you were to send that information across, if you had it within Sitecore already. And the way that we do that is very simple. We go to add segment, and we'll get a box like this that appears, and this gives us all of the different options that we can choose to segment a user on. These are the default options, but under conditions, you could select that. You could type in the name of the data point that you sent across from Sitecore, and you could say, hey, only show me where the persona matches institutional investor, or only show me this data whether engagement value score is greater than 50 or something of that nature. So it's very, very powerful, and I would really encourage you to have a think about how you could use this segmentation within Google Analytics even before you look at integration, because it truly can produce some miraculous insights. The second option is that we can use something called a secondary dimension. So in this case, I've got a report which is it actually is the device report. So it's a screenshot of a device report where the dimension is the actual type of device, so desktop, mobile, or tablet, and the metric in this case could be users, new users, or it's a bit hidden, but sessions. And a secondary dimension, rather than a segment, which when you apply it to the report filters everything here by what you've specified in the segment. A secondary dimension breaks down these different rows of the report, so desktop, mobile, or tablet, by whichever additional dimension it is that you want to include. So if you had a new dimension that you pushed into Google Analytics for persona, again, you could add a secondary dimension to the report of persona, and then you would see the number of users per persona on desktop, the number of users per persona on mobile, the number of users per persona on tablet. In a simple scenario here, just to illustrate what that looks like, I've added browser as a secondary dimension alongside device category. And you can see that now we're not just seeing the overall number of visits on desktop, we're seeing the number of those that were from the browser type Chrome, and presumably further down the report, with a cutoff in a screenshot, you'd also see the number that came from Safari on a desktop, or from Firefox on a desktop, or Internet Explorer, and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are the two main methods by which we can actually tap into the information that we've pushed into Google Analytics from Sitecore once we've got it in there. And now we can talk about some of the ways in which we can start to use that information in order to produce some great insight. So firstly, something that we're doing for a lot of our clients is that when we're running a test, an A/B test or a personalization test, we're pushing the information into Google Analytics, and we're not relying upon the Sitecore reporting, we're relying upon the Google Analytics reporting. That's good because, as I mentioned, GA is your marketing source of truth. So if you think that a test has improved performance against a specific KPI that you have, it would be best if the numbers that you're reporting on are actually aligned to Google Analytics, because there can be some differences. When we've got the data in Google Analytics from a particular test, we can analyze it using the segmentation capabilities that I discussed before. And oftentimes this leads to learnings way more valuable than just knowing that the test won or lost. So you might, if you weren't doing this, understand that a test in Sitecore was able to improve performance against a specific goal. But what you wouldn't know, which is something you can understand from Google Analytics once you've combined this information, is which segments of the test audience perform better or worse. So was it the case that the test was particularly good for people coming from SEO, organic search? Was it particularly good for returning visitors versus new visitors? And these are all sorts of like learnings about why the test performed as it did. that can help you to plan what the next test should be and how you can get even better at what you're doing. And finally, data in Google Analytics, by virtue of the fact that GA has all these native integrations, you can push it quite easily to a reporting tool like Data Studio, and that means that your business stakeholders can digest the information more easily. And what I've got here is an example of a dashboard in Data Studio that we created for one of our clients that's doing exactly that. We've got information about which personalization or A/B test people saw pushed to Google Analytics from Sitecore, and then we're pulling that from Google Analytics into Data Studio, and we're able to create a nice dashboard with one simple overview of all the different tests and activities that we're running. Another great thing you can do in Google Analytics is that because, as I mentioned, GA is part of this broader Google ecosystem, Google Analytics can also give you some indicative information about the demographics and interests for your website visitors. So let's say you had a persona set up in Sitecore, and you had this idea in your head that the people who were matched into that persona would be between the ages of 18 to 44 typically, and that they would be really interested in technology, for argument's sake. Just having that persona set up in Sitecore, while it would be great from the point of view of being able to create a personalized experience for those people, you wouldn't actually be able to validate some of your assumptions around the demographics or interests of the people that matched into that persona. So if we are pushing this lovely information about what persona our visitors fit into Google Analytics, then we can apply that persona as a segment on top of these demographic and interest reports. And in doing so, we can get information that Google is inferring about the age and interests of people that fall into that persona. And so where I said we have an idea that people that fit within that persona within 18 to 44 age bracket, maybe we'd actually find that 40% of them are from 25 to 34. Maybe where we thought that people that were most interested in technology, we'd find that people in that persona are mostly actually shoppers, things of this nature, which can also help with your media spend allocation, because if we're wanting to attract people and bring them to our website, we're going to be trying to appeal to their interests and advertise to those people on the types of websites we think they're likely to be looking at. And so it's quite important that we have a good understanding of who they are in order to make those decisions about how we can best attract them to the website. Similarly, outside of personas, we can use Google Analytics once we've got a persona in there to do some form of journey mapping. So we can map out the journeys of some of our key personas to work things out like which personas have the longest buyer journeys. Are there particular points in our funnel that have large dropouts for a particular persona? Are there journeys that different personas have in common? Like, do they have a particular channel or marketing channel or landing page / entry point on the website that they come via? So this is an example where I've got this frequency and recurrency report in Google Analytics. I've applied a persona over the top of that report, which is for a prospect. So we've pushed for each visitor across to Google Analytics if they fall into this persona, and now we can apply a segment to filter that report to only show information for that persona, as we discussed. And now I can see, hey, actually a not insignificant number of the prospect type personas have 3 visits. Actually, like quite a few of them have 9 to 14 visits. And again, we can start to get a better insights and a more well-rounded view about who these people are, as opposed to what Sitecore can do, which is just put them into the persona in the first place. Here we can really drill into who that persona is. Again, were we pushing persona across to Google Analytics, we can start to look at some kind of marketing attribution for that persona. So what did we do? What channel were we advertising on? Or like, how did that person that fit within that persona first find our website? So there's 2 screenshots here. One hard to see in the background, but one is of a marketing channel report. So we're looking at the number of visits or sessions that came to us across a bunch of different types of marketing channels. And here, this is the segment screen that I was referring to. That's the dominant screenshot over the top there. And in this segment, what I'm doing is saying, hey, show me the marketing channels for users that have the persona of private ISA. So it could be for an investment firm, for argument's sake, and show me only information in this report that relates to that persona's first visit to the website. And so what that report would then be doing is showing us the marketing channels that brought that persona type to the website on their first visit. And lo and behold, we might find that there's particular ways in which we're creating awareness for that persona type that we weren't aware of. Or we can help to understand that we are maybe out there in the marketplace having specific awareness generating activities for a type of audience or a persona type, how successful it actually is. Another great thing to do is to help understand the performance of your marketing campaigns using engagement value. So I mentioned that there's a feature of Google Analytics called calculated metrics. Well, actually I said custom metrics, but there's another feature called calculated metrics. So the custom metric is where for a particular visitor, we've pushed in, for example, what the engagement value of that visitor is. And so now Google Analytics is recording for all the visitors that come to your website what their engagement value is. Then we can create a calculated metric on top of that, which is making a calculation using that engagement value score that you're pushing in, and using that in a calculation with another metric that Google Analytics is already collecting, like the cost of a particular marketing channel, AdWords for argument's sake. And what we can work out using this sort of calculation is how many engagement value points we're getting per dollar of marketing spend or like advertising cost. And this is quite a nuanced way to work out how efficient or how effective a specific channel or campaign is, because the reality is that only a small percentage of the traffic that you're sending to your website from a campaign will convert. So a calculation like cost per acquisition or something is not as nuanced as this sort of calculation, which is also helping us understand how that all those people that didn't convert but still were quite well engaged by the campaign. Another thing we can do is to, so as I mentioned, Google Analytics is integrated with like your ad network. You can push segments from Google Analytics off and advertise to those people outside of your website. And if in Google Analytics, we're pushing in the engagement value score of a user and what their persona is, then we can create a segment matching that. So like in the screenshot here, a segment of visitors to your website that fit into the institutional investor persona and who had an engagement value score of 75. We can push that into the Google Display Network, and then we can actually target an advertisement to that specific audience group. Maybe because you know they're institutional investors, so they have a very high value to you if they convert, and because you know that they're already highly engaged. Having such a nuanced segment would mean that you can put more money behind the campaign than you would otherwise be able to if you had a more generic and less highly targeted campaign. So that's the way in which you can use the information that Sitecore is collecting, push it all the way right through to your advertising campaigns and make your advertising campaigns even more efficient. You probably have, or you could have, I should say, personas that don't reflect like a product interest, for example, but maybe you have personas in your Sitecore website created that are trying to measure where the person fits within the buyer journey in a generic sense. So you could have a persona that people fit into or match into if they are looking at content, like awareness type content, maybe your blogs or insights, things of that nature. You could have another persona for consideration, which is when that person starts to visit is it product related content? Maybe Sitecore would shuffle them into the consideration persona. And if Google Analytics had visibility over the fact that this person had first been in the awareness type persona and then they moved into consideration, then we could look at a calculation like how many people within the awareness, or what percentage of people within the awareness persona actually moved into consideration, or how many moved from consideration to decision. And then we can start to understand if we have points in our funnel that our website is doing particularly well or poorly at. Maybe if we're converting none of our awareness visitors to consideration, we need to look at how we're interlinking product related content into our blog articles and things like that. I touched on this a little bit, but out of the box, Google Analytics knows very little about the content of the page that someone is looking at. So it might know, as I said, the page path or the URL and the page title. Sitecore knows a lot more. And by picking up on that additional information or context that Sitecore has about the content on your website and pushing it into these things called content groups in Google Analytics, then we can start to look at the performance of content by author, by word count, by taxonomy, by type, by journey stage, so on and so forth. Any way in which you're categorizing or tagging your content in Sitecore, you could considerably push into Google Analytics. And this will really help you to understand what's performing, what's not performing, what are you publishing a lot of content on that has very few visitors? Do you have particular guest bloggers or guest authors that do really well, and so on. So it's very worthwhile to give Google Analytics more information about the content people are browsing, because then you've got more options at your fingertips from an analysis point of view. And just finally, in terms of things you can look at doing, we've talked about how engagement value is a great metric once you've got it calculated to use in these different calculations, or to build into segments and look at high engagement value scorers and what they're doing and so on. But for many organizations, and this is we've got to be realistic here, many organizations aren't yet actually at the point of even having configured engagement value. So obviously one of the starting points here should be to learn from the humans within your organization what their view is of the most important actions that a visitor could be taking on your website and how those should be scored. So we'd always encourage you to do some form of workshop in order to start to flesh out what an engagement value model looks like for your organization. But as marketers, or as people who maybe aren't even marketers but involved in that process, there's going to be a lot of assumptions about the relative importance or value of different interactions that users can be making. And what we want to do is validate that our assumptions are right. And if they're not right, we want to do something about it so that we're not misallocating the engagement value, because then it becomes less accurate and less helpful. So Google Analytics can do two great things in order to help us to validate how we are allocating engagement value. The first thing that Google Analytics can help us understand is how important a particular conversion goal is. So here, if we said, for example, that a case study download in our workshop was highly important, that we thought lots of users would want to do that, we could go into Google Analytics, we could apply a segment saying, show me all of the visitors that have, or the users who have seen a case study, or as I've got here in the example, submitted an inquiry form, downloaded a document, and so on. And we could look at how common that behavior actually is. And if we found that actually almost no one who converts does download a case study or downloads a document or whatever, then we'd know that actually it's not really that important a goal. So maybe if, you know, in our engagement value workshop, we've given that document download or case study download 90 points because we thought it was highly important. Maybe we scale that back a little bit if we found out that actually almost no one who converts does the action, because clearly it's not that impactful to our audience if that's the case. And then outside of importance, which is like what percentage of users that convert do that thing, we have impact. which is not just whether or not someone did it, but did it actually make them more or less likely to convert. So using Google Analytics, we could say, yeah, if someone did download a document, how much more likely did that make them to convert? Now, if it made them like 20 times more likely to convert than if they hadn't done it, then you say that is quite an impactful goal and should have a high engagement value score. But if it made them less likely to convert or only had a marginal improvement upon their likelihood to convert, then again, maybe you would scale back the importance of that goal a little bit, give it fewer points, and thereby know that you're having a more accurate calculation. So that was a whistle-stop tour, I guess, of all the different ways in which you can use that Google Analytics information, Sitecore information, I should say, in Google Analytics. Do we have any questions, Mario?
Give me 1 second, Doug, I'll just check. Actually, I've got a quick question for you before I just run through the ones that came through. How much, in your experience, how much development overhead is there in terms of implementing some of the things you've talked about today?
There's not much. The biggest thing will be developers coming to grips in the first instance with these concepts that I referred to, like a data layer, because it might not be something they've been exposed to, but I don't know how. I don't know if I could quantify it in days, but not very much for each individual point of information that you want to send from Sitecore to GA. So probably it's a more extensive project if you want to send everything that's in Sitecore Analytics across to Google Analytics, because then obviously there's lots of bits of information to send through the data layer. But on a one-by-one basis, I think we're talking like a day or days, not weeks or months to get it into GA.
Well, thanks, Douglas. It doesn't look like we've had any questions come through. So I think we were able to give people back 15 minutes of their day. If anyone has can think of any questions, perhaps pops up in their minds afterward, obviously feel free to send us an email with the questions, and obviously we can get back to you offline. But thank you very much, Doug, for today's presentation.
Thank you, Mario, and thank you to everyone for attending.
Cool. Okay, everyone, today's session is recorded, and I will send over a link to this in the next couple of days. So thank you very much and have a nice day.